What is up, YouTube? Bubbles and Ball Cards back with another video. It is Monday, March 4th, and we have had a wild past like 4 or 5 days now. It's been extremely busy. I have made several appearances on other channels, live streams. Appreciate folks inviting me in. Also, obviously, did the live here on this channel and discussed the news, the acquisition. Um, have been reading comments, have been listening to other videos of folks, and just kind of having conversations with people, looking at things in different ways, both positive, negative, or neutral. That's okay. But it's been kind of a crazy several days. I would say this is like the biggest activity really that we've had in the hobby. I would probably say since the whole Fanatics acquiring Tops, or Fanatics having acquiring the NFL and NBA licenses. But yeah, it's been a crazy few days. I hope you all are doing well. I want to say, you know, shout out to the folks that reached out and had me on. I do appreciate it. Obviously, y'all know me by now. I enjoy talking, and so getting to come on and discuss things within the hobby with folks, I appreciate that. I am very humbled at the amount of times I have heard now that when SGC or things like that are mentioned, the first person that comes to mind is bobbles and ball cards, and that's just a kind of a cool thing, to know that this channel has had, I guess, somewhat that impact in the space, or that connectivity, I guess you would say, to a company like that. And people might ask why that is, and I think more, it's just it's been several years now that I have kind of stuck to my guns. Yeah, I've submitted cards to CSG back before they became CGC. Um, I like their holder and stuff like that, but overall, I've kind of been focused right in with just SGC and what they provide. And I think no one can deny that they have grown into one of the most recognized companies in the card grading space, and the respect that they've gained over time, the trust that they have, built within the hobby. Um, I remember the trolls and all of the people that would come in back in 2020 when I used to go live every single evening for an hour or more. And, there would be people in there that always were negative, and there still is today, let's face it. But there was trolls and negativity and everything else, and people would say you're stupid and this and that. There's been ups and downs, things ebb and flow, but overall, like, I think, sticking to something, especially when it's not the popular opinion, and having success with it is a better accomplishment than, being successful when you take the high road and the easy road, right? It's easy to go and do what everybody else is doing or what the popular opinion is. It's not that easy to be successful when you're going against the grain. And I feel that's kind of the route I've taken, and I've stuck to it. And, that's a testament more to the other people that have recognized the value within the company. It's a testament to the guys at SGC to continue providing a good service and, trusted grades, consistency, all of that, all of those things. They've gave me reasons to voice my opinion, in a negative manner. I mean, they have an understanding down there that I am going to be honest. I'm going to say what's on my mind, whether it's good or bad. And there's folks that might say, "Well, you just praised them because you're a bulk submitter." I have also, you know, criticized them when it was due. Like, I have literally done. I did a video that is probably long forgotten now, but when Pete had this crazy idea that bulk submissions were going to be $50, my first words when I heard that was, "I'm done." And I said, "I'm not gonna charge," I'm not even gonna begin to try to tell my people that grading cards in a bulk submission at $50 makes a damn bit of sense. And, I took a break from submitting for a while until, things came back around and the price came back down, and that's just who I am. Um, I've always felt like no matter what I'm doing, whether it's talking about SGC or cards in general, I am going to share my true feelings and true thoughts on it. And people are either going to agree or disagree, and it's fine. People aren't always going to see eye to eye on things, and that's just part of society in general. People aren't always going to like the same thing. And I've been glad to share my honest opinions and stay true to not only myself, but, um, you know, doing things maybe not in the most, easiest manner. But I've heard a lot of opinions out there. Most all of the videos, well, actually, all of the videos have just been speculatory. And I think that's just part of content. Like, people always wanna throw different opinions out there and see what sticks to the wall and who can roll the dice and, be right, and then they can look back on it and say, "Well, you see, I told you so," right? I think that's just the content space in general. And, nobody is sitting in the boardroom when these companies are discussing what they're doing and then, sharing it here on YouTube. Nobody has the true business answers to any of it. It's just what we all think or what we think makes sense. But, the other reality is, and I had to retract my thoughts a little bit on this from the initial thinking, because I initially did have the camp of, oh crap, PSA can just wipe SGC out and boom, you know, they have no competition, right? But then I had to think about it as, what sense would that make? Like, why would you buy a company to just literally wipe them out? I mean, does SGC really take, what would it benefit PSA that much to wipe them out? And then I started thinking about, well, there's a lot of people out there just like myself that even if SGC didn't exist, we still wouldn't use PSA. So at the end of the day, Collectors, the company who actually acquired SGC, they would have to write on paper, and it would have to be something substantial that they feel it was more profitable to not own SGC than it is just to own them, let them continue running, let them continue to grow, let them continue to provide a service to the consumer base that they have built trust in, a following that loves the tuxedo, that loves the grading, that a lot of people, even as surprising as it is, a lot of people love the slab. Um, you know, they would have to look at the pros and cons here. And then, people are like, "Oh, but in corporate America," well, corporate America and sports car grading, there's quite a bit of differences because let's be honest, sports car grading, the hobby in general, has tendencies that prove itself to be pretty ass backwards. How many times can PSA screw up significantly? How many times can they be investigated or be tied to scams or, provide crap grading or, have a piss poor quality slab to be? And this is just, my opinion. If you love their slab, so be it. But when you crack it open and you see how thin that plastic really is, it's not that impressive. It's light, it's easy to store in a box and things like that. Sure, it's easy to read on the flip, but the red, I mean, come on. It's pretty ugly at the end of the day, just like, people say the black is ugly. Black is a neutral color. Red is the freaking color of a fire truck. So I don't know. There's always these discrepancies and there's always going to be these battle tendencies. And now you got two competitors that, are the two biggest in the space, so to speak, combining as one. And then, a lot of things, and I want to dive into some numbers here a little bit below the surface. But before I do, I want to mention that Peter did an update today. And I actually had recorded this video previous to that update, and then I seen it and I was like, well, let me go back in here. The update wasn't anything significant. It was more, he acknowledged that they have, the turnaround time's been screwed up, and he promises that they're gonna get that under control. He said as of right now, they're at about 11 days. That's great news. He talked about and acknowledged that they haven't done specials, and it's gonna be a meme thing, probably people are gonna laugh at it, but he said he called it a special. Whatever that means, I don't know. But he acknowledged that they haven't been doing the specials because they were running behind. The demand had grew, and they didn't want to just pile on more cards. I think that's respectable, and it should be acknowledged that instead of just continuously taking cards in, knowing that you're just going to put the consumer that's already submitted with you further and further and further behind, you're going to put makeup on a problem. Um, I think that deserves a little bit of credibility. Um, and then, of course, he talked about the acquisition and just shared a couple things that now they have access to. And that is one thing that collectors will be able to provide SGC. I've heard people saying, calling Pete out for stating things and then never following through with it. And you have to look at the source here of collectors has a lot more money that they could help SGC. They have a lot more access to technology that they could help SGC. SGC was a small, privately owned company. When I started using them, if memory serves me right, they had 4 employees. And you think about that a second. 4 employees running a grading card business. That's crazy. And today they're obviously a lot larger. They have grown way bigger than I think people realize. Um, but hearing all of these speculatives and the negative Nancy's out there that are throwing shade at every different direction they can, just because, oh my God, when I talked to my rep last week, I told him, I said, did y'all think about the implications of being associated with the company that a lot of your support system absolutely hates? And he acknowledged that yes, there's going to be people out there that will refuse to use them because they don't want their money going to collectors. But that's because a lot of the confusion is that the money goes to PSA. PSA is owned by collectors, just like SGC is owned by collectors. The evil empire that's being built is by collectors, not necessarily PSA. PSA and WADA are connected. You don't hear people talking about that. That's because WADA is in a different subcategory of grading, but they're still grading collectible items. They're just under the same umbrella, right? Now, SGC and PSA both grade cards, so they're more formally connected. But I want to get into some numbers here. I also want to acknowledge that people are looking at SGC as, oh well, they only had 7% of the market share, and overall, that is correct, but there's some things that are pretty eye-opening that most folks that look at SGC are acknowledging them in the sports space and not TCG space. And so when we exclude those numbers and look at it, I think you're going to get a different image here. And I want to share just like why would collectors even be interested in purchasing SGC? And so let's look at those numbers. But before we do, right here, shout out to GemRate. They do the Lord's work throwing all these numbers out. I dug back below the surface because people tend to not do that. They look at the surface and, there might be a deep bruise that hasn't came yet. And they just wouldn't recognize it. Everything would look peachy keen because that's just what this hobby does. They want to do things in the most simplest fashion possible. But I dug back and I went back to GemRate and I went to 2021. And so here we have PSA 2021 in review. I wanted to get a good example of where PSA stood in 2021. Keep in mind, they had a backlog that was still sitting there. They were digging through that, so they already had some initial demand there. But let's look at it and see, because it says they did 7.76 million cards in 2021. And it states that that was roughly double what they did in 2020. So for 2021 and 2020, you could say that they did approximately 11 million cards. All right. If you think about that in today's terms, without even me showing you any numbers, PSA is now doing in 1 year more than they did in the 2 years combined of 2021 and 2020, which happened to have been the pandemic period. That happened to be when they had a backlog that was piled high. Okay. They were a brute force that was growing exponentially. And to think that they did approximately 11 million then 2 years, 2020 and 2021, and now in a single year can do that when the market and everything is corrected and all this other stuff. It's kind of crazy to think about. So, keep that in mind as we move forward on this. Um, Here we have a page that shows all-time grading stats as of January 1st, 2022, and it showed that PSA at that point had graded 37.9 million. Now, as I just stated, 2020 and 2021 was approximately 11 of that 37 million. So a chunk of it was right there in a 2-year period. You have Beckett sitting with 8.3, and SGC at this time was at 3.5 million cards. And this all is taken from Pop Reports. GemRate does all of this data. So, this was 2022's, we're in 2024 now. So approximately, 2 years, 2 months ago is when these numbers were sitting here. So I wanted to go and do a breakdown and look at what did these companies do through 2021. And this is all estimated, obviously, because the way the years and the acquisitions when the companies like started and everything could be a little off. You also have to think that the pop reports cards get cracked out, and, resubmitted somewhere else, or cracked and resubmitted to the same place. So some of that is skewed. So these numbers are just totally estimated, but it gives us a good idea. So I had PSA sitting at 29 years at 2021. I'm going off of an article I found on Sports Collectors Daily that kind of shared time of when the company started. So approximately 29 years, and I have them at an average of 1.3 million cards per year. Now, as of right now, they're doing that almost a month. So that's pretty crazy to see how much grading has evolved. And, you got to think like PSA when they started, there wasn't Pokemon cards and stuff. So some of that plays into it. There has been obviously a huge growth in the TCG side of things, but Pokemon didn't even exist when PSA started. So you got to keep that in mind. I have Beckett at 22 years. I think they actually started slightly after SGC, but SGC, I think it was July of 98. And then Beckett, I think, was in 99 or later in 98. But for the sake of it, and again, this is simply estimated, I have them both at 22 years. Um, that would give Beckett an average of 377,272 cards per year average as of the end of 2021. And SGC would have been averaging 159,090 cards per year at the end of 2021. Obviously, inflated a lot by the 2020 push and the 2021 push. Their numbers grew heavily in those 2 years. Which obviously would have increased their average per year. So let's look at 2022 and see where things stood. And I am excluding TCG because, again, SGC is known in the sports space. You don't hear this talk as much in the TCG space. In fact, I don't know if any of the TCG channels or collectors out there even cared that collectors bought SGC, to be quite honest with you. I think this news is mostly solely here in the sports card space. So at the end of 2022, you had SGC doing 919,000 sports and non-sports. They have it classified as miscellaneous here, but sports and non-sports cards. And PSA did 7.4 million for the year 2022. Pretty good numbers here. You had Beckett at 507,000, CSG Now CGC, and it says 2822. They did 635,000 according to Generate's numbers. But let's fast forward to 2023, and this is where things get really interesting. So PSA did 7.2 million in 2023. That was a change year over year of negative 2%. They dropped. Beckett did 387,000. They dropped 24%. CGC 314,000. They dropped 56%. There is something that stands out to me here, and it is clearly that SGC grew 25%. They were the only one of the four companies to go positive. And they didn't just go positive, they went positive by 25%. You have all of the other three that took a drop. And then the one company that grew 25%. That is taking a pretty large market share or sign of growth year over year. And keep in mind, it's not like they've worked off this backlog. They have been running, with a quick turnaround time all of this time. And the demand was enough that they could grow by 25% in what has not been shied away from, a down sports card market. We are out of the boom now. We're a couple years removed from the boom. And they grew 25% in sports and non-sport grading. I think that has to be recognized as a lot of value. You could have the little tinfoil hat, instructor cap on and say, well, that's why they bought them, because they were taking too much of the market share and they just want to wipe them out. Or you could look at it as collectors seeing growth. They seen a substantial growth, really. And that's profits that now, if they were losing market share, or if they see that the sports card space maybe isn't as strong, how do you gain profit margins in a space that might be difficult to grow in? Well, if you purchase a company that grew 25% in a down market, that's likely a damn good way of creating profits in a space, right? So going back over here, let's look at 2024. Month over month, January here, SGC did 141,000 cards. PSA did 660,000 for sports and miscellaneous. Again, look at the year over year, month over month. Now, CGC, it's a year over year, they're down 42%, but month over month, they got a bump there. But you're looking at 49,000 cards for sports and non-sports in the month of January versus, if you take these two and combine them, you're talking 801,000 versus under 50,000 cards. That is huge for collectors. Exclude PSA, like make this blank and this blank. Collectors, just put collectors on there, collectors on there. Look at it outside of brand, okay? And say collectors owns these two. Collectors now has 801,000 cards versus 49,000. Let's fast forward to February. Last month, we got those numbers. Oh, well, that's 852,000 cards for sports and non-sport that collectors owns. Collectors, 852,000. That is a 129,000 card profit increase that they didn't have just owning PSA. They just gained, let's call it, I don't know, $800,000 million in that 1 month that is potential profits for the company, collectors. That's insane. And then you look at your competitors down here and they're sitting at 46,000. You have 852,000 to 46,000. I think that's pretty significant. Now, let's go ahead and discuss the 7% market share right here. You see 2023 summary. Overall, 7% market share. It shows CGC had 10% and Beckett was sitting there at 4%. But again, SGC is not known in the TCG space. And most of the people that are uproared about this or concerned about this are sports cards. And if you look at sports cards, you now have two companies that are combined for 93% of the market share. because in sports, SGC owned 13%, almost double here. They were 13% to 80% PSA. That's that's a lot bigger than 78. That's not 10 to 1 here anymore. It's 80% to 13%. And now you have 93% versus 7% for CGC and Beckett. That is, if you want to completely take over sports cards, you just did it. Now, one would argue 80% was a significant amount. You're not lying, but look at the growth. I just told you they were the only company that in 2023 grew while the others had actually declined. So they obviously must have see it, they must have said, hey, they're not at our point yet, but they are growing on us. They have increased, they have taken some of that market share away from us. How can we regain that? And it's not necessarily as simple as just erasing their name off the board and writing PSA in, because again, you're going to lose a lot of that consumer base if you did that. Those people will not use PSA. So why not just let them run? Why not own 93%, run in parallel? People that support SGC continue using SGC. People that are PSA, they're flipping or they do the registry or what have you, they go PSA. And then collectors, at the end of the day, they count their money. They just increased by, essentially potentially $1 million a month in revenue. That's pretty huge. And then, you go down here and you hear all the time, well, SGC is great in vintage, but they don't have much ultra modern market share, and that's fair because it's never been the case, right? SGC's never been this looked at ultra modern thing, and people will still argue it. But when you look at the numbers, there's something that stands out here. 50.8% of SGC's sports grading is the 2020s. You look at that, it is higher than CGC's, it is higher than Beckett's, and it is just behind PSA's numbers. 50% of their cards graded in sports cards has been 2020's ultra modern cards. So it's not, I mean, you look down here in the 50s, yes, they have a much higher percentage than the other companies. No doubt about it. So they are known, but they actually have a market in both places now. 12.2% of them were 50s and earlier, 51% was 2020s, 54.1% for PSA was 2020s. They're not too hot right here in this area that some other companies are pretty decent at. They're not good there, but I think a lot of that comes down to, centering and the condition, like basically the way they grade the card. I think they're a little bit more tougher. And so people try to, send them maybe elsewhere to get a little bit easier of grade, so to speak. And that's fair. But when you look at the ultra modern space, 54.1, 50.8, and they're second in the 2020s over what they are grading, not market share, their actual graded cards. How much is coming in? Over 50% in 2023 for SGC was cards from the 2020s. So, when you really break things down and look at the numbers a little bit further, SGC could be a very good, profitable company for collectors. And they were likely seeing that not only, the volume that they're doing, but the growth of volume that they're doing. And if you're a business and you want to find out, like if you're in a competitive space, again, the simple answer is wipe them out. But when you know that you're going to not retain that whole audience, then the smart thing to do is let them be who they are. Let them continue to grow until they don't grow. Let them continue doing their thing until it's like, okay, this move didn't work out. The people don't like that we own them. Their market share has dropped. They're not doing the volume, whatever, and then make a decision. But people are immediately putting that out there that, oh, well, collectors is just going to wipe them out because they want PSA to grow. It's not going to mean that PSA is growing that same amount, and it's not going to create as much revenue as that. If you really, and people are talking about, well, the business costs of owning both businesses. If you look at PSA's revenue and SGC's revenue and just look at it simply of the profit margin, you're already deducting the expenses that are involved, right? You're already cutting that out. You're looking at your profit margins. You then have to ask yourself, which direction is more profitable? And I would have to argue that cutting them out and losing a large percentage of your trust and consumer base, thinking that they're going to shift over here, I think that would be a wrong move, because I think there's a lot of people that would just stop grading, or, maybe try out CGC or something to that extent. I don't know. But I do think there would be a lot of people that would not transition over. And seeing these numbers, looking at 25% when the other three companies were down, I mean, it's not, it's still 1.1 million to 7.2. But when you look at this here, and the number two company in sports cards was substantially higher than the two companies in 3 and 4, that's pretty solid too. You also, if you take the January and February numbers and you do the math on them, and then multiply by 6, because you got 6 times the amount of months to go, you're looking at like 1.6 million what they're on pace for this year. That's half of what they did last year. If they grow again, let's say they hit 1.6 million this year, that's another huge leap of growth there. So anyway, guys, again, this was just fun to break it down. People are going to assume and speculate and everything. I'm not here to say that in 5 years everything's going to still be rainbows and unicorns. I'm not going to say that in 2 years. I don't know. I am not Nostradamus. I don't have a crystal ball that tells me what's going to happen. The only thing I can say is, knowing the folks down there, and when I spoke to my rep and how excited he was about this, that gave me a big boost of confidence over what I had had before speaking to him. And people are going to say, yeah, but he's paid to do that, blah, blah, blah. This isn't the CEO. This is a guy under him. And he was excited because he sees, kind of the potential behind what this could mean. Those guys are down there. They're going to continue, pushing hard to do what they've done to grow by these percentages, to provide to the collector community, to provide to the hobby. Again, I'm excluding TCG because that is a different market space, and I'm not going to speak on their opinions of it. I don't think this affects them as much as all at all as it does sports. But all I got to say is, buckle your seatbelt. It's going to be a fun ride. And I can't wait to see actually what happens. Keep eyes on the growth, or if there's a decline. If there's a decline, then yeah, I could see, collectors saying, hey, we invested money, we tried it, it didn't work. Shit happens. But I think for now, the best thing to do is to look at the numbers and just say, kind of made sense. But anyway, that's all I got for you guys. I'm sorry this was a bit longer, but I did want to break all of this down and kind of share some of these numbers and thoughts on it. I do appreciate all of you, and hope you have a nice day. As always, stay safe, stay healthy. Until the next video, I'm out.